Let's start with something simple. What's the top of your reading list these days, and what are you taking away from that?
Well, with China, there's, of course, a lot to read. When you talked about smoke signals, of course, one of the most important sources we have, the closest to sort of a voice of the leadership is the People's Daily, the official newspaper of the CCP. So that's always one at the top of my reading list. It's been quiet because there's a Labor Day holiday, but we're seeing a lot of the messages that we just heard Min talk about, really positioning China as a responsible global leader. China is a champion of multilateralism, and contrary to that, the U.S. as a unilateralist, as a hegemon. I want to emphasize that a lot of these messages have been consistent throughout. I think some of the changes we're seeing most recently maybe have more to do with the pivot, the change within the U.S. and China seeing opportunities there for its typical messages than really any particular escalation or change on China's part. But we can talk more about those.
David, I mean, you at the China Media Project, I believe you've been looking at this for more than 2 decades now. And in fact, I think you might just have hit your anniversary, your 2-decade anniversary. I mean, over that period of time, how much more slick has the propaganda machine become? And where are we seeing that, if we are seeing that, manifest when it comes to narratives around the trade war in particular?
Really important question right now, because things are changing right now in the last few months even faster. I think coming around the corner, we're going to see a lot more savvy AI-based propaganda. I would sum up and say, really, over the past decade or so, China has suffered. The whole discourse from the leadership has been about China suffering at the hands of a dominant Western media apparatus. And so the whole policy is geared toward addressing what it sees as a shortfall of Chinese impact. So in many ways, they've been very unsuccessful. And we saw this during the COVID epidemic. And the whole focus kind of on this wolf warrior messaging has been, China has been looking at changing this over the past year or so since we've come out of the pandemic. I think we're returning a little bit to this more truculent tone because of the stance of the Trump administration. But I guess one example we can point to, there have been a couple of videos out recently. One, of course, was the truly viral video on U.S. manufacturing returning and what this would look like. So it was an AI-generated U.S. factory floor, a very humorous piece in some ways. So that level of sophistication is really new. I think the overarching story is more or less failure of China to convey its message.
David, are there any signs of a softening in tone?
I think we have various tones we can see across the leadership. If we look at the state media, for example, People's Daily, we've actually, I think, seen an uptick in more, I wouldn't call it aggressive language, but just very firm language. So we've seen also the video that was trending from the foreign ministry on Twitter, what was it called? About never kneel down, I think it was called. So agreeing to the enemy's side is like drinking poison. This kind of language is more typical of what we've seen with the so-called wolf warrior diplomacy. And then looking in the last few days, we had a piece just yesterday about the white paper coming out on the origins of the COVID pandemic and China turning around and saying the U.S. needs to look at itself in terms of, because we believe there's reason to see the U.S. as a possible origin. So China turning around the attack. And we're seeing this a lot more. China attacking the U.S., as I said, as a hegemon. That's the narrative. And the real problem here, I think, in terms of messaging is that, in a sense, China for many years has tried to foist this role on the U.S. It's always talked about the U.S. as irresponsible, as a hegemon, and so on. But the behavior we're actually seeing from the Trump administration is in many ways taking on the role that China has cast for the U.S., almost embracing it. And I think the leadership probably sees a real opportunity here on the media side, of course, but in terms of re-engagement, deeper engagement with Southeast Asia and so on. So we see a really powerful media side to this as well, including a lot more media exchanges with regions like Southeast Asia and the global South.
David, that's a really interesting point about the sort of other side of China's strategy here, also trying to essentially play nice. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of those strategies to try and boost media ties, where they're really particularly focusing their attention?
Yes. I mean, one, of course, is they've long sought content sharing agreements with groups like Xinhua and the China Media Group. The idea is that China wants, especially reporting and information about China, to be to the great extent possible, monopolized by China. So it's taken advantage of kind of the longer curve of a downturn in media capacity around the world, and there's a lot more demand for China news. So this is one thing, and then there's a lot of face-to-face engagement with journalists in regions like Southeast Asia. So content partnerships, journalist trainings, bringing journalists to China. The whole idea is to drive the narrative. But as I've said, to some extent, this has been very unsuccessful so far over the past decade, we could say. Right. I think it's worth pointing out, even with this video, that what I just mentioned, the Never Kneel Down video, all of that push and amplification came from media outside China. I think probably the foreign ministry is delighted to see, for example, CNN talking about this as an escalation and so on. So when I look at that, I see basically an inserted meme that was really picked up and snowballed in the Western media. This is because China still, after more than 7 decades, they have no truly influential media outlets. None of their central media outlets can really drive global debate. So this continues to be a problem for China, but it will capitalize on this moment to portray itself as someone the rest of the world can work with, while the U.S. is difficult.